There are things in this world that cannot be proven inside a laboratory. They leave no physical trace, no measurable data, no repeatable experiment. And yet they shape destinies, destroy souls, and echo beyond death itself. Science demands evidence. Faith demands humility. Between the two, humanity has always struggled to choose which voice to trust. This story is not about ignorance. It is not about blind belief. It is about a man who was brilliant, highly educated, widely respected and admired for his sharp mind. A man who believed that truth must bow before reason, and that anything beyond scientific explanation was worthy only of ridicule. He openly declared himself an atheist. He mocked the idea of miracles. And above all, he attacked one belief he considered the most absurd of all, that a woman could give birth and remain a virgin. To him, the Virgin Mary was not sacred. She was a theological mistake, a symbol of superstition that deserved to be dismantled by intellect and logic. The Rosary, he claimed, was nothing more than a chain of meaningless words whispered by the weak. And he did not keep these thoughts to himself. He spoke them aloud. He taught them. He used his knowledge not only to doubt, but to offend. This is the story of what Saint Dominic witnessed one night while praying the Rosary. A vision not sought, not invited, and not imagined. A vision of a soul suffering beyond language, crying out from the depths of hell. A vision that carried a terrifying message for believers and skeptics alike. Because doubt may be human, but mockery is a choice. Saint Dominic did not go looking for hell that night. Hell came looking for him. Before we continue, I invite you to pause for a moment. This channel is not here to force belief, nor to condemn those who question. It exists to tell stories, ancient, sacred, and unsettling. Stories that ask us to look inward rather than argue outward. If you value reflections on faith, conscience, and the unseen realities that surround human choice, consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows them to reach those who may need them most. As you listen, I ask only one thing: open your heart and set judgment aside. You do not have to agree with everything you hear, but allow the story to speak before deciding how you feel. I would also like to hear from you in the comments below. Do you believe in the doctrine of the virgin birth? Why or why not? Is it acceptable to doubt, but never to mock? Have you ever experienced peace or even a miracle through praying the Rosary? Your thoughts matter. Respectful dialogue strengthens understanding, even when beliefs differ. Now, let us return to the night when Saint Dominic's prayer was interrupted and the vision began. The night had fallen into complete silence. No voices echoed through the corridors. No footsteps disturbed the stone floor. Only the faint rhythm of breathing and prayer remained. Saint Dominic knelt alone. In his hands rested the Rosary, simple, worn smooth by years of devotion. To him, it was not an object, not a symbol, and certainly not a habit repeated without thought. The Rosary was breath itself. Each bead carried memory, suffering, hope, and surrender. Each prayer was an offering spoken not with the lips alone, but with the whole soul. The candle beside him burned low, its flame trembling as if aware of something unseen. Dominic's fingers moved slowly from bead to bead, deliberate and reverent, as though time itself had softened its pace to follow his prayer. The world beyond the room no longer mattered. The concerns of men, debate, reason, pride fell away. There was only prayer. When he reached the third sorrowful mystery, his movements slowed even further. The scourging at the pillar, a mystery of pain willingly endured, of innocence torn by cruelty, of suffering accepted without resistance. As the words left his lips, the air around him changed. At first it was subtle. The warmth of the candle faded, the shadows stretched longer than they should have, bending unnaturally along the walls. The flame flickered and then steadied, as though held in place by an unseen force. The silence deepened. It was no longer the peaceful silence of prayer. It was heavy, pressing, almost alive. Dominic felt it before he saw anything, an overwhelming stillness that seemed to suffocate sound itself. Even his breathing felt distant, slowed, as though the night had tightened its grip on time. The room darkened, not suddenly, but gradually, as if light itself were retreating in reverence or fear. The stone walls dissolved into shadow. The floor beneath him felt no longer solid, but distant, fragile. Time no longer moved forward. Each second lingered, stretched thin, suspended between prayer and something else, something approaching. Dominic did not speak. He did not rise. He did not resist. His fingers tightened around the rosary. The beads were warm in his hand, grounding him, anchoring him to the mystery he was contemplating. Pain, sacrifice, redemption purchased through suffering. And then, from somewhere beyond sight, beyond sound, a presence stirred. Not yet a voice, not yet a form, only the unmistakable sense that prayer had opened a door and something from the other side was about to step through. The third sorrowful mystery had not ended. It had begun to reveal its depth. And Saint Dominic remained kneeling, rosary in hand, as the vision slowly prepared to unfold.
The silence shattered, not with thunder, not with movement, but with a sound so raw, so desperate, that it seemed to tear through the very fabric of the vision. A scream. It was not the cry of a living man. It carried no breath, no rhythm, no hope of relief. It was agony without end, pain stripped of mercy. The sound rose from below, far below, like a wound opening in the darkness itself. It echoed without echoing, filling the space while coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Saint Dominic did not cover his ears. He could not. The cry pierced deeper than sound. It pressed into the soul. Then, from the blackness, a shape emerged. At first, it was only motion, twisting, convulsing, writhing in fire. Flames did not surround it. They clung to it, fused to its form, as though the fire itself had claimed ownership. As the figure drew closer, its humanity became unmistakable. It was a man. Not a demon with claws or horns, not a beast formed of nightmare. A man. His face was distorted by suffering, yet still bore traces of what he once was. Eyes that had known intelligence now burned with terror. A mouth that had once spoken with confidence now opened only to cry out in despair. "This is not punishment," the soul groaned, its voice breaking under the weight of its torment. "This is truth." The flames did not merely scorch flesh, they penetrated memory. Scenes flashed within the flames, lecture halls, written words, public applause, moments of pride. Each memory ignited, consumed, and turned against him. His intellect, once his crown, now fed the fire. Every argument he had crafted, every word he had used to dismantle belief, returned sharpened, burning, undeniable. The pride that had elevated him above others became the heaviest chain. It pressed upon his soul, dragging him downward even as he struggled to rise. "I thought I was free," the man cried. "I thought reason was enough." As he spoke, shadows moved behind him, not touching, not speaking, watching. Their presence was subtle but unmistakable, like laughter without sound, satisfaction without expression. They had not forced him here. They had only waited. Saint Dominic understood then. This was not a demon being tormented. This was a human soul, fully conscious, fully aware, experiencing the consequences of choices freely made. The flames did not destroy him, they revealed him. They stripped away excuses, illusions, and self-justification. They burned away everything he had used to protect his pride. Only truth remained. The cry rose again, louder, more broken, more desperate than before. And as it echoed through the abyss, Saint Dominic felt the weight of what he was witnessing. Hell was not chaos, it was clarity, and the vision was only beginning. The man in the flames was not always broken. There was a time when his name carried weight, a time when people leaned forward to listen the moment he began to speak. He had earned that authority carefully, methodically, through years of discipline and study. He was a professor, a doctor of philosophy and science, a man whose life was built upon reason, logic, and proof. From a young age, he learned that questions were more valuable than answers, that doubt was not a weakness, but a tool. He excelled in systems that rewarded analysis and skepticism, where every claim was tested, dismantled, and reconstructed under the cold light of evidence. Faith never fit into that framework. To him, religion belonged to an earlier age, a time when humanity lacked microscopes, equations, and controlled experiments. He saw belief not as evil, but as obsolete, a comforting myth for those unable or unwilling to face uncertainty on their own. As his reputation grew, so did his confidence. He spoke publicly about atheism without hesitation, even pride. God, he claimed, was an idea born from fear. Miracles were coincidences misunderstood. Prayer was self-soothing, nothing more. And then there was Mary. The doctrine of the virgin birth troubled him more than any other belief, not because it challenged his morality, but because it challenged his understanding of biology. How, he would ask, standing before lecture halls filled with attentive students, can a woman give birth and remain a virgin? He did not ask this with curiosity, he asked it with certainty. To him, the answer was obvious. It could not happen, and therefore it did not happen. What could not be demonstrated through physical evidence was dismissed outright. What could not be replicated under observation was labeled irrational. Truth, he insisted, must submit to experimentation or surrender its claim to reality. Religion, he argued, asked people to abandon reason. Science, he believed, set them free. At first, his words were measured. He spoke of belief as poetry, beautiful, symbolic, but not literal. Mary, in this framing, was an allegory, the virgin birth a metaphor misunderstood by the faithful. But over time, his tone sharpened. He grew tired of what he saw as intellectual dishonesty, of doctrines preserved not because they were true, but because they were sacred. Faith, he once said, is what people cling to when facts fail them. Applause followed. Each affirmation fed something within him, not curiosity, but superiority. He did not see himself as cruel. He believed he was honest.
and honesty in his mind justified everything. When confronted by believers, he smiled patiently. He encouraged them to question, to think critically, to free themselves from what he called inherited illusions. And when the Rosary was mentioned, those repeated prayers, those beads passed from hand to hand, he laughed softly. A ritual of repetition, words spoken without thought, a circle of comfort mistaken for meaning. He had no hatred for those who prayed it, only contempt for the idea that it mattered. In his world, truth was not received, it was conquered. And so he trusted his mind above all else, above tradition, above mystery, above humility. What he never considered, what never crossed his brilliant, disciplined intellect, was the possibility that reason alone could become a prison, that truth might exist beyond what could be measured, and that the greatest error was not doubt, but believing that the limits of the human mind were the limits of reality itself. The flames around him pulsed brighter, and for the first time the man understood, not through argument, not through proof, but through unbearable clarity, that what he had dismissed as myth had been watching him all along.
The man did not fall because he questioned. Doubt by itself had never condemned him. Questions had not opened the abyss beneath his feet. What sealed his fate was something far more deliberate. He mocked. At some point, doubt was no longer enough. Curiosity gave way to certainty, and certainty hardened into contempt. He stopped asking whether faith could be true and began insisting that it deserved to be ridiculed. His words grew sharper, more theatrical. What once sounded like academic critique became public derision. Standing behind lecterns, in interviews, in published essays, he spoke not merely against belief, but against devotion itself. He named the Virgin Mary openly, not with reverence, not even with neutrality. He spoke her name as one would speak an error to be corrected. The virgin birth, he declared, is not a mystery, it is a biological impossibility preserved by tradition and fear. Each time he said it, the audience leaned in. Some nodded, some laughed. Encouraged, he pressed further. A virgin who gives birth, he repeated, is an insult to reason. The phrase became his signature, a line quoted, shared, praised for its boldness. To many it sounded courageous, intellectual honesty in a world too afraid to abandon old myths. But the man was no longer arguing against an idea, he was striking at what others held sacred. He dismissed Mary not as a woman of faith, but as a symbol fabricated to control the masses. He scoffed at the notion of her purity, calling it a dangerous fantasy imposed upon humanity by religious authority. And then there was the Rosary, those beads passed through trembling fingers, those prayers whispered in hospital rooms, prison cells, and lonely bedrooms, those repetitions spoken by the desperate, the faithful, the broken. He ridiculed them mercilessly. A loop of empty words, he said, a psychological crutch disguised as spirituality. He mocked the repetition, he mocked the rhythm, he mocked the idea that counting prayers could bring peace, healing, or grace. In his lectures, he displayed images of the Rosary only to dismantle it piece by piece, bead by bead, prayer by prayer. He insisted that it trained minds to surrender thought, not deepen it, that devotion replaced inquiry, that faith dulled intelligence. And people listened. Students repeated his words, followers echoed his tone. Those already uncertain found validation in his confidence. Without realizing it, or perhaps without caring, he did not merely lose faith,
he took others with him. Every mocking remark planted doubt in hearts not prepared to defend themselves. Every sarcastic smile encouraged shame in those who prayed quietly. Every public dismissal of devotion whispered the same message: "You are foolish for believing." He never shouted, he never cursed. His cruelty wore the mask of sophistication, and that, more than anything, made it powerful. Behind his polished arguments, something else moved. Not inspiration, not enlightenment, pride. He believed himself above devotion, above mystery, above the humility required to kneel before what could not be explained. And pride does not scream, it smiles. The man did not realize that every word spoken in contempt carried weight beyond applause, that mockery is never neutral, that what is ridiculed publicly is wounded privately. In the flames now surrounding him, those words returned. Each joke ignited like fuel, each insult sharpened into fire. Each time he said her name without reverence, the heat intensified. "I only spoke the truth," the soul cried, twisting in agony. But the fire answered with memory. Truth had never been denied him. Humility had been offered and refused. He could have doubted silently. He could have questioned respectfully. He could have disagreed without destroying. Instead, he chose to offend. And now, stripped of intellect, applause, and authority, he understood too late the difference between questioning belief and wounding it. The abyss did not punish him for lacking faith. It answered him for using his mind to tear down what others loved, and calling that destruction wisdom. The flames surged higher, and the phrase that once earned him admiration now echoed back to him as judgment. A virgin who gives birth is an insult to reason. In the abyss, reason no longer defended him. Only truth remained.
As the flames writhed around the soul, Saint Dominic noticed something he had not seen before. Behind the man, beyond the fire, beyond the twisting agony, a darkness lingered. It did not surge forward. It did not threaten or strike. It stood still, as though perfectly content to remain unseen. The shadow had no form that could be clearly described. It was neither horned nor monstrous. It did not resemble the crude images imagined by fearful minds. It was subtle, patient, almost dignified, and it was watching. As the flames screamed and convulsed, the shadow did nothing. It did not touch him. It did not command him. It smiled, not with lips, not with sound, but with a quiet satisfaction that needed no expression. Saint Dominic understood then that this darkness had not dragged the man into the abyss. It had not whispered threats or forced obedience. It had simply agreed with him. Every time the man had elevated his intellect above humility, the shadow had nodded. Every time he had mocked devotion, the shadow had approved. Every time pride disguised itself as enlightenment, the shadow had remained silent and pleased. The man, writhing in fire, finally turned his gaze toward it. For the first time, there was no argument in his eyes, no defiance, only recognition. "You never made me do it," the soul whispered, his voice breaking. The shadow did not respond. "You never forced my words. You never moved my mouth." Still, the shadow remained quiet. "I chose," the soul said, louder now, as though confessing aloud would lessen the pain. "I chose to mock. I chose to humiliate what I did not understand." The flames surged, not in anger, but in clarity. Memories returned with unbearable precision.
moments when he could have stopped, when he could have softened his tone, when he could have remained silent. But he had enjoyed the applause, the feeling of being superior, the intoxicating belief that intelligence alone made him untouchable. "No one forced me," he cried. "No one compelled me to speak." Saint Dominic felt the weight of that truth press upon the vision. Freedom, the most dangerous gift God gives to humanity. The man had been free to doubt, free to question, free to walk away, but freedom had been twisted into a weapon, used not to seek truth, but to wound it, not to understand, but to dominate. The shadow behind him seemed to lean closer, not to intervene, but to witness the confession it had been waiting for all along. "I mistook pride for courage," the soul groaned. "I called it honesty. I called it progress." The fire responded by stripping those illusions away. In hell, there were no lies left to tell oneself, no titles to hide behind, no intellect to negotiate mercy. Only the naked truth remained. The shadow finally moved, not forward, not backward, but simply shifted, as if its work had long been finished. It had never needed to speak, because the man had spoken enough for both of them. Saint Dominic realized then that evil does not always shout commands. It does not always demand obedience. Sometimes it only waits for the human heart to crown itself above God. The soul's cry faded into something quieter. Not relief, not peace, but understanding. "I was free," the man whispered, "and I chose wrongly." The shadow did not rejoice. It did not gloat. It simply remained, as it always had. And Saint Dominic, holding the rosary tightly in his trembling hands, understood a truth as chilling as the flames before him. Hell is not filled with those who were forced to enter it. It is filled with those who insisted on standing alone, until eternity agreed with them. The fire around the soul dimmed for a moment, not extinguished, but pulled inward as if the abyss itself were allowing him to remember. And he did. His mind was carried back to a quiet room filled with the faint smell of medicine and fading life. A hospital bed, white sheets, machines breathing where lungs no longer could. He lay there, thin and fragile, his once commanding voice reduced to whispers. The hands that had gestured confidently before audiences now trembled, weak and unsteady. There was no lecture hall, no applause, no students waiting for answers, only time running out. He could no longer debate. No strength remained to construct arguments or dismantle beliefs. Even reason, his lifelong ally, had grown silent in the face of pain and approaching death. Those around him spoke softly. Some avoided the subject altogether. Others, with gentle concern, mentioned prayer. Someone, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of fear for his soul, spoke her name. Mary. Not as an argument, not as a doctrine to be defended, but as an invitation. "Just say you are sorry," a voice pleaded, "just in case, just a word." The man closed his eyes. For a moment, only a moment, there was hesitation. Not belief, not faith, but doubt. A fragile opening where humility could have entered. No one asked him to abandon his intellect. No one demanded proof be denied. They asked only for one thing, a gesture of humility, a refusal to mock, a single word of regret. But pride is strongest when the body is weakest. He opened his eyes again. "I will not apologize," he said quietly. "I will not betray my mind." Even then, mercy waited, not with threats, not with fear, with silence. The silence that allows a final choice to be truly free. "Say nothing, then," the voice begged. "Just don't mock. Just don't deny her." His lips tightened. "I will not lie," he answered. "I do not believe, and I will not pretend to." He turned his face away. In that moment, no one condemned him. No lightning fell. No voice thundered from heaven. Grace withdrew, not in anger, but in respect for his freedom. And the moment passed. His breathing slowed. The room grew still. The final refusal had been spoken, not loudly, not defiantly, but firmly. Back in the abyss, the flames surged once more. The soul screamed, not because he had doubted, but because he now understood what that last moment had meant. He had not been asked to understand the mystery. He had not been required to explain the virgin birth. He had not been forced to pray the Rosary. He had been asked only for humility, and he had chosen pride. "I could have been silent," the soul cried, agony twisting his voice. "I could have said nothing." But silence, too, is a choice. At the edge of death, when arguments no longer matter and titles fall away, what remains is not intelligence, but the posture of the heart. And his heart had remained standing when it could have knelt. Saint Dominic felt the weight of that moment settle upon him like a stone. This was the tragedy. Not that the man lacked faith, but that at the final threshold, when pride could no longer save him, he still refused to let it go. The flames answered his choice, and the memory faded, but the consequence remained.
Saint Dominic did not speak. He did not raise his voice against the vision before him. He did not attempt to explain, correct, or condemn what he had witnessed. No words formed on his lips, because none were needed. His hands tightened around the rosary. The beads pressed firmly into his palm, each one grounding him as the abyss trembled and the cries slowly faded into the distance. The weight of the rosary felt heavier now, not as an object, but as a responsibility. Dominic's face remained calm, yet his eyes were filled with sorrow. Not outrage, not judgment, compassion. He did not look upon the suffering soul as an enemy of truth, but as a man who had lost his way, slowly, deliberately, freely. There was no triumph in this vision, no sense of victory for faith, only grief. Dominic did not argue with the man's intellect. He did not rehearse doctrines or recite explanations of mystery. The time for words had passed. Instead, he prayed, quietly, steadily, with a depth shaped by years of surrender. Each prayer fell like a tear into the silence, not spoken for effect, not offered as a lesson, but as an act of love. The shadows receded, the flames withdrew, not extinguished, but veiled. The abyss seemed to pull back upon itself, as though the vision understood that it had been fully revealed. Dominic's fingers moved to the final bead. The last prayer lingered on his lips longer than the others, not because he hesitated, but because he felt its weight. This was not a prayer for understanding. It was a prayer for mercy, for the living who still had time. As the final bead slipped gently between his fingers, it fell. Not loudly, not dramatically. It landed with a soft, almost imperceptible sound. And with it, the vision closed. The darkness dissolved. The air grew warm again. The candle flame returned to its fragile dance. Saint Dominic remained kneeling, unmoving. The rosary rested in his hands once more, simple,
silent, unchanged, yet everything around him felt different. He did not rise to speak of what he had seen. He did not rush to warn or persuade. He remained still, because some truths are not meant to be argued. They are meant to be carried, quietly, faithfully, from one prayer to the next. And in the silence that followed, Saint Dominic understood. The Rosary does not shout. It does not demand belief. It waits for hearts willing to listen before the final bead falls.
When the vision faded, what remained was not fear, but clarity. Saint Dominic did not leave that night with answers neatly arranged. He left with a truth heavier than explanation. Doubt, he understood, is part of being human. To question is natural. To struggle with belief is not a failure. Even the greatest minds wrestle with mystery, and even sincere hearts pass through seasons of uncertainty. God does not condemn doubt. What the vision revealed, quietly, unmistakably, was something else. Mockery is not doubt. Contempt is not inquiry. To say, "I do not understand," is honest. To say, "I am not convinced," is fair. But to wound what others hold sacred, to ridicule devotion, to humiliate faith, that is a choice. Faith is not uniform. Not everyone kneels in the same way. Not everyone believes with the same certainty or expresses devotion with the same language. And God allows this. Freedom is not an accident. It is a gift, dangerous, profound, and real. Human beings are free to believe, free to question, free even to walk away. But freedom does not remove responsibility. The man in the vision was not condemned for lacking faith. He was not punished for failing to prove a doctrine or accept a mystery. He was shown the consequence of using freedom to tear down rather than seek, to elevate the self rather than listen, to replace humility with pride. The Rosary, Saint Dominic reflected, is not a scientific experiment. It cannot be measured, replicated, or reduced to data. It does not submit to laboratory conditions. And yet, through centuries, through war and illness, through despair and loss, countless souls have found peace while holding those beads. Lives have been changed, hearts softened, miracles whispered rather than shouted. Not because the Rosary forces belief, but because it invites surrender. Science seeks to understand how. Faith dares to trust why. They need not be enemies. The tragedy revealed in the abyss was not intellectual honesty. It was the refusal to allow mystery to exist at all. The insistence that what cannot be explained must be mocked, that what cannot be proven must be destroyed. Saint Dominic carried this message not as a warning shouted to the world, but as a quiet truth held close to the heart. You may not believe, you may struggle, you may doubt deeply, but do not despise what others love. Do not mock what gives them hope. Do not confuse humility with weakness or pride with courage, because belief can be questioned without being wounded, and freedom, when guided by humility, leads not to darkness, but to truth. The vision ended. The night returned to stillness. The candle burned as it had before. No trace remained of fire, shadow, or cries from the abyss. And yet, nothing was the same. Saint Dominic did not leave that place with fear clinging to his heart. He did not carry anger, nor a desire to persuade by force. What he carried was silence, the kind that lingers after truth has been revealed. This story is not told to frighten. It is not told to corner the mind into belief. Faith, if it is real, cannot be coerced. You are free.
free to believe, free to question, free to remain unconvinced. God does not withdraw that freedom. He respects it, even when it is used to walk away from Him. But freedom is never empty. It always moves in a direction. The man in the vision was not asked to abandon science. He was not required to solve mysteries beyond human reach. He was not forced to kneel or pray words he did not believe. He was asked for something far simpler: respect. Respect for what he did not understand. Respect for what others held sacred. Respect for the mystery that exists beyond the limits of proof. He could have doubted quietly. He could have disagreed without wounding. He could have remained silent where certainty did not belong. Instead, he chose mockery, and eternity answered that choice. This story does not claim that questions are dangerous. It suggests something far more unsettling: that pride can disguise itself as intelligence, that contempt can wear the face of courage, and that silence, when humility is possible, may be the wisest form of speech. So the question is not whether you believe. The question is how you choose to stand before what you do not. If respect costs nothing, why risk eternity for mockery? The Rosary remains in waiting hands. Faith remains an invitation, not a demand. And time, for now, still belongs to the living. The choice remains yours.